So, welcome back to the second part of a double whammy from the graveyard. Today we'll be looking at the Masteries that never came into the game. So, Masteries were this big revolutionary feature the devs were laying the ground for with the first expansion and have continued to exist through subsequent Living World seasons and X-Packs. The idea being that they expand your capabilities as a character on a horizontal plane. They're not power creep, they're not giving you, just straight up stats and invalidating old experiences and so on, but instead the new expansions would provide challenges that you'd have to acquire masteries to deal with. The idea being, by completing adventures and special objectives, you can get points, and with the points you can buy masteries that you train through experience. Gives experience a purpose in the game. Again, after all, Guild Wars 2 with a max level of 80, once everyone's there, what do you do with XP? Well, you build masteries. So there are so many different ways ArenaNet could have taken this, and you can clearly see that they were experimenting with it before Heart of Thorns came out. What we eventually had was like some very linear progression trees that you don't really put much thought into. You just kind of get a bit of a choice, I suppose, as to whether you want to start with gliding or It's or Exalted. Each one generally themed after some of the denizens of the jungle. But what you might not know is it seems like at one point they were going to have more of a branching idea, and there were actually a lot more trees. There was a tree to do with the dinosaurs of the jungle. There was a tree to do with the chuck in the jungle. And eventually a lot of that stuff got cut down, got rolled into the existing trees, and many masteries were removed altogether. Going through a mastery tree, they continue to increase the number of points you need, so 1, 2, then 3, and so on, until you get to like quite a high number of points. So I guess the devs wanted to keep the trees quite small in the end, but just look in this video now at all the weird new capabilities that were going to come in with this expansion. This is pretty much all the masteries, by the way, that I can find. The other thing I would say is there were obviously work in progress and different versions of masteries through Living World releases, but I don't think they got as far, or we don't have as much evidence for them beyond what devs talked about in the streams. So mostly I'm going to be talking about the original slew here, and maybe I'll do another part of the graveyard in the future if I can get some real good documentation about Living World stuff too. Somehow I doubt it. Starting off, let's look at a cut mastery from the gliding line. Gliding, obviously, pretty simple. Allows you to dispatch a glider while you're falling. You can travel around, slowly falling, and mitigate fall damage. And as you progress through the actual tree, you end up getting updrafts and a couple of new improvements. There are a few ones here that never made it. First, fast deploy wings. This was going to cost 7 mastery points, so kind of deep in the tree. Through a series of high-tension springs and quick-release levers, you've rigged your glider to be able to deploy its wings more frequently. So there are actually pretty interesting in-game descriptions for all masteries, even the ones that were implemented, and they're all flavorful and fun. I wish the devs could have sort of made a bit more prominent on the UI, but when we're reading these cut ones, they sound all the more interesting. So here, it looks like they were playing with a long delay before you could get your glider out. And I actually think that sounds really fun. That means that for certain drops and certain timings, you are still going to take full damage, and maybe the idea as you progress through the jungle, you're shrinking that time down and down and down. I think they might have moved away from it in the end. As we've seen over the years, there were latency considerations, and people playing, say, in OCX, but connecting to Europe, if their ping's too high, or even connecting just to North America, they would actually struggle more with gliders and adventures and stuff in the jungle, because they can't deploy quick enough, because the ping getting sent to the server saying, hey, I want to get my glider out, is a lot more delayed. ArenaNet never realized that problem either, developing Heart of Thorns, because obviously on all their test machines, they were playing on like local servers with very low latency. It was only after the game came out that these problems came through. And I think if they had doubled down into this design, where the gliders had a variable speed at which they come out based on how far into the mastery you've gone, it would have made things a lot worse. Another gliding mastery here is Powerful Leap. This one costs 10 points and is really incredible. I remember actually them talking about this in a very early interview from Heart of Thorns. After intensive leg training, you have learned to boost yourself into your glide with far greater force. So, the way we see that the glider works in-game now is you hold the button and it falls out. It doesn't actually interact with jumping. Like, if the floor just fell out behind you, you don't have to jump or anything, but now you hold the jump button while in midair, and it will give you the glider. This is suggesting a totally different version, where while running around, we don't jump to get on the glider, but maybe we press a completely different button or skill, a new element on the UI perhaps, and that doesn't just function as a jump, but actually kind of a high jump. This is crazy, because this is kind of like saying to players, you can just jump higher forever. And we actually saw when Path of Fire came out, they in the end decided that was fine with the Springer, essentially, and how most mounts actually let you jump a little bit higher, even on their dismount animations. But for Heart of Thorns, I guess that was a bit much for them. At 10, this would have been one of the last things you got in the gliding mastery line. And I'm assuming this was going to be a gliding mastery line. Just a higher jump. It's crazy. I remember when they first announced the mastery system, some people were saying, hey, maybe we can get double jumps. It looks like ArenaNet were quite close at one point. Next, we have stronger bindings. This one was quite early in the tree. You learn to bind the wings of your glider with stronger binding straps, and the result is the longer glide times without tearing apart your wings. So, this mastery is actually very close to what we got in the end. A lot of veteran players may forget this by now, but you actually can't glide infinitely when you first pick up the tree. You were spending endurance as you glided, and when it ran out, you would fall out. It was a really cool mechanism that meant, hey, when you first unlock gliding, certain new areas of the jungle become available, and then when you max it out, there's new places. For a lot of us, it's been like 5-6 years of infinitely gliding, and it's not a mechanic we think about at all. But, and that's because of the account binding and all those other inherent flaws with the mastery system. But here you can kind of see a middle step where it's like you can glide a bit longer, but not infinitely. The devs just cut this away. Again, I think it's because of a balance of the amount of XP being asked to complete the full thing and the amount of points that they were asking. These sort of more incremental steps never got added. But I can imagine a more tree idea of the mastery system where you can specialize into longer glides, or maybe you want to specialize into higher jumps, or maybe you want to specialize into being able to get into updrafts and then leyline gliding, and you actually have the choice. Suddenly having loads of these makes more sense. Next, there's thick wings. This was the original opener for the tree. With practice, you learn to treat the wings on your glider, strengthening the flaps and allowing you to stay in the air longer. Of course, the first one in the tree is the game we've now got, is to just learn to glide straight up. But here it seems like they had a different idea. Maybe you would have acquired the glider and it wasn't a mastery, and then the masteries begin at this point, but they kind of refined that. So that was a pretty minor little one. But right at the start there, just one mastery point, and again, lets you stay in the air a little bit longer. Maybe there would have been like a whole tree that went thick wings into stronger bindings and so on. Moving on, we have another tree. Now, the wiki is describing this as mushroom lore here. There is no such thing as the mushroom lore tree in-game. It's just learning to deal with the new hawk on the Itzel, and they might teach you a bit about mushrooms as you go. But there was once upon a time an idea that the whole thing was about various kinds of mushrooms: adrenal mushrooms, swiftness mushrooms, bouncing mushrooms. And here, there was another type, the recovery mushroom. Gain the ability to consume these multifaceted healing mushrooms, healing you instantly and curing some conditions. It's funny, I think this would have been really good as a part of the expansion. I think they could have done some interesting combat sequences with this. And it's funny because I think we get this kind of experience of running over pickups and being healed in all sorts of places in the game. So totally would have worked in the engine. The main thing I think that this originally was going to be in use for is on the second map of the Heart of Thorns expansion, where there's a cave filled with toxic poison, and we need to eat adrenal mushrooms to recharge like our heal skills so that we can actually keep healing ourselves. Well, maybe once upon a time that would have just been recovery mushrooms in there. More diversity, more depth, more stuff to do in the X-Pack. I really lament the loss of this one. I think this is a shame. It was quite late as well, 7 points in, as you can see. They could have designed like open world boss fights that spawn these mushrooms at certain phases, and it would have been fun. Here we've got Master Forager, once again in the mushroom lore line that kind of got compacted away. With training, you've learned to spot the mushrooms in the heart of Maguma even faster, and they're now more visible on your map. Weird idea, because yes, if they were already on the mini-map, but like kind of translucent, and then there's a whole mastery that just makes them thickly visible, I don't think that would have been good, especially with overlay software and stuff in the game, and 10 points for that, for a UI tweak, doesn't make much sense. However, if there was a whole other version of this, which was essentially that we'd have to scan and reveal where mushrooms were, well, then that makes more sense to me. How that would have worked with like jumping mushrooms, would they have been underground and then they'd only sprout up once you scan the area and then you jump on them? If this was like some kind of broader mechanic where all mushrooms are not immediately visible, this works. And actually, if I think about the kind of gameplay experience at the moment of you just know where an adrenal mushroom is all the time and you just walk over to it and it doesn't really add much to the gameplay because You know, it's all very static and binary. The idea that there was once going to be a mechanic that hid the mushrooms from your sight, well, suddenly this whole part of the game feels like it makes a lot more sense. Would have been really cool if they managed to flesh all of this out. There's also massive bouncing mushrooms for 13 points. Now, what's kind of cool is one of the earliest masteries you can get in Heart of Thorns is learning to jump on the bouncing mushrooms, which do really feel like they're tangibly unlocking a new area of the jungle. It's a great experience that I hate I can only ever have once lifetime on my account. Well, we have seen the way that the game works is once you get any bouncing mushroom, depending on how the devs code that mushroom, it might take you a tiny little area, or it might fling you really far. There was no distinction. Well, they were originally thinking of that. After much practice and core strength training, you can use massive bouncing mushrooms to fly even further through the air. Start with learning the little mushrooms, end the whole tree with the massive bouncing mushrooms. This would have been good. I have a feeling this might have been removed because it felt repetitive or something. Maybe it would have been too transparent that the masteries are just a simple gate. Like, we've already had the experience of not being able to use a jumping mushroom, and now we can. So do we really have to do it a second time? And I think the devs were reticent about it, might have removed it there. My answer to that question, actually, is yeah, do it. Even if it does feel repetitive, I think what ArenaNet missed out on is the fact that you may see a few mushrooms early in Verdant Brink that you want to jump on, but you can't. But then you get the T1 Mastery for just a tiny bit of experience in the first point. And now, all the mushrooms in the rest of Verdant Brink are already unlocked when you first find them. So you don't get that Metroidvania experience. Worse, all the mushrooms in Auric Basin are already done. And all the mushrooms in Tangled Depth and beyond are already done. So now it's just like this masturbatory reward thing where it's like, cool, here's a mushroom and I earned this. There's no gameplay there. But if the whole way through the expansion you were still finding these massive ones and there was this excitement about an actual objective, you could have had that experience mattering for more than just half a map, is what I'm trying to say. I would have loved this. Next, we have Nuhok trail signs. So it's important to know that before the expansion came out, they talked about mastery trees kind of being to do with the new denizens of the jungle and actually learning their language. A lot of that stuff didn't come through. It's basically, here's a vendor, you can't use the vendor until you get a mastery. Really boring. But here you can see a nice twist on it. Master the art of reading Nuhok trail signs, allowing you to gather information in the field. And the Nuhok trail signs reveal that which was hidden before. Really fascinating to me. Now, I don't know what this would have meant for the gameplay. Would we have been able to find hidden treasure chests? Would we have been able to collect mastery points, maybe? You know how a lot of the mastery points in the jungle are basically just hero challenges? They're just communes. They're really boring. Maybe you'd have to dig some of them up. Maybe there was something more involved going on. I don't know what the gameplay was going to be, but I'm especially excited by the idea that this would have been opportunities to learn new lore as well. And this mastery right here, this would have paid off on their initial comments about learning more about these cultures and thus unlocking secrets of the jungle. This one was lost. We don't know what the content that was going to be behind it was. Maybe it's been displayed to us somehow just through another method in-game and we don't realize it. But I can't help but wonder what would have been. Nuhok energies on the same tree. The Nuhok tribe teach you the ways of surviving Chak energy. By absorbing a powerful Chak energy discharge, you're able to create orbs that you and others with this ability can use to break through impenetrable champion Chak energy shields. So the energy shields do exist in game, but they are break bars. You break the break bar, the shield goes away. And it's a really well designed thing. Kudos to ArenaNet. They have retaliation on them while the bubble is there, and that can mean you can really kill yourself on certain builds. So it's a good mechanic that people do interact with. A lot of these masteries early on, though, were kind of affecting combat too. And the idea was, here's an enemy, we're going to see like the Mordrem with tough bark in a moment. You can't really hurt it very well until the mastery unlocks your ability to like penetrate that bark. Really interesting idea. ArenaNet completely went back on all of that. All those like deep combat interactions are gone. And it's a shame with the Chak in particular because they do have that weird mechanic where they like stack goop on you and then you can get like one shot if there's too much goop. I get the sense there was going to be a lot going on there. I don't know why the studio was reticent or scared of it. I guess because they were really, really, really concerned that people thought that this was going to be about power creep. Again, there's a thing with the mastery system where it is basically just a level of artifice another thing that you have to, a motion to go through to get back to your regular power level, right? So if they're giving you these enemies that almost feel arbitrarily high in defense, and now I arbitrarily have to go and get this mastery, people won't like the system. And if that's too obvious, that's what's going on, then yeah, they might have wanted to pull back on it. I like the idea, though. I would have liked to have played this and felt this experience. We didn't see them really come back to this in Path of Fire or any of the Living World stuff either. And I don't know, maybe it's a line in the sand they should cross, to be honest, because a lot of the masteries seem strained. I think they can do a lot more things with them. Going over to the Itzel herbicides. The Itzel have taught you the various extracts around the Maguma to create poisons. The poisons allow you to do bonus damage against poisoned or burning Mordrum. So there's a really specialized one, where only players with builds that contain poison or burning damage can actually get value out of this mastery. We find that the masteries they implement nowadays are all very ubiquitous. All builds, all play styles generally get as much value as the next build. But here it's kind of just this specific thing. If they're going for this, I mean, I can imagine like a tree of masteries where there's a whole like variety of options. Maybe one of them helps you with poison and burning, maybe one's to do with chill, particularly with the Reaper coming into the game. I could have seen that. Maybe some other conditions or other various effects. So every build ends up getting a little something somewhere, but they moved away from this. This one's really curious. Itzel writings, just like the Nuhok stuff, you discover the glyphs and pictographs you've seen around the heart of the Maguma are the Itzel tribe's written language. With practice and conversations, you've learned to decipher them and discover the hidden treasures that they conceal. I'm not going to go on a massive speech about that again. You'll notice this one costs just 2 points, so super early. Itzel hunting. Through dedicated teaching, the Itzel train you how to take special trophies from foes in Maguma, unlocking rare collections. So we do see a bit of this come through with Heart of Thorns. Heart of Thorns really played as an expansion a lot with the idea of how collections can be used as rewards and hidden away until certain times. And I think that the flavor of this one flows super well, at least. 10 points, so it would have been pretty late in, but now you're getting new loot. We kind of see this made it in-game in a certain form. There's Itzel Stalking as well, 13 points to get this one. The Itzel teach you how to operate their harpoon cannons scattered throughout the Maguma, letting you pull wyverns down to your level to hunt. So there's actually 2 masteries we'll find that talk about the wyverns specifically. And let's think then about Verdant Brink. There's like the Wyvern Matriarch in the middle. There's all those wyverns around the Patriarch event. Were there once upon a time going to be cannons situated on all those events? Interactables that players only with this mastery could get a hold of? And again, it would be a bit like when they make a boss arena that has mushrooms in it. You know, maybe this boss arena has these cannons in it, and they're saying specific players who have specialized for this mastery can play. And again, I think the mastery system works better when there's more masteries to go for, so that players kind of feel like they're making roleplay or build decisions instead of just going through a list. I mean, what's fun about going through a list? Even though ultimately everyone will have everything, that important moment where you're building up, that's what the mastery system was a celebration of. So anyway, fun idea, cannons to shoot wyverns out of the sky with. Here we get Mordrum of Spain. Tier 1, as you can see, the Exalted introduce you to the basics of combating the Mordrum. Their conditions affect you far less. So, Wiki doesn't seem to know where this would be, but there is actually the Exalted tree in-game. We have the Exalted tree, so I think this would have been early on here. And again, it's a combat-affecting one, so I guess ArenaNet reined back on it. They weren't too excited. Just a couple more now. Another Exalted one here, the Exalted Honing for 12. Learn how to efficiently pierce through tough, impenetrable bark, which makes some of the more powerful Mordrum unbreakable. So how would this have been done? A totally immune Mordrum as we run around? I'm particularly interested in the idea of the husks, which had been in the game for a long time and are really resistant to physical damage, but vulnerable to Condi. Would this have let us hit husks? Now, that would have been really fun. And the reason why I think that would have worked so well for the Mastery system is because husks predated the expansion. So you've had players for years who have had this experience, and now the expansion's given you a way to overcome it. Instead of arbitrarily introducing a wall and also arbitrarily introducing the thing that will let you climb the wall, here we're actually getting a new tool to deal with an old problem, and that might have felt a bit more authentic. Either that, or they would have gone with all other varieties of Mordrum. I think they actually did really well in Heart of Thorns, fleshing out Mordremoth's army in different varieties. Perhaps some of those big champions we found in Dragon's Stand might have been hidden behind this bark, and the players need to grab this. There's also, this makes me think of another thing, which might explain why they got rid of the combat stuff. The fact that players might have felt compelled to tunnel vision combat stuff. Like, oh, I don't want to not be able to fight. Some people think that combat is the be-all and end-all, and maybe they wouldn't have relished the decision between movement or combat. So ArenaNet just wanted people to think about movement, you know. So do you want to be able to bounce on mushrooms or glide? They're both about getting around the environment, and so maybe that's fun. They didn't like contaminating that with combat decisions too. They didn't want to make people feel like they're forced to go all the way deep into the Exalted tree for this, when realistically they want to go for other stuff. Maybe that's what they're trying to avoid. Lastly, for Heart of Thorns, we have the Wyvern Defiance. The Exalted have taught you to stand in defiance of wyverns, and they can no longer knock you down with their wing buffets. This one's interesting because for a lot of those big wyvern fights, they have these really long phases where all they're doing is the wing buffet. That is it. And if that was doing nothing, these would just be massive DPS uptime moments. The weird thing is, the way that ArenaNet designed all of this is you can nearly always just stand behind the wyvern anyway and get that full damage uptime. So this mastery would have actually felt really useless if everything was implemented exactly as it is. It's like, well, I don't need this mastery. I can just position slightly better. I guess maybe if this mastery was implemented, the wing buffets could have covered the entire platforms that you're fighting various wyverns and stuff on. That could have worked a bit better. But I can kind of see why they got rid of this. Even if it's a fun idea, the enemy has a specific ability, and now we're negating it. I also like the idea that the Exalted, these constructs built to fight against dragons, are teaching you about dealing with dragon minions, the Mordrum, and wyverns, which aren't dragons, but you get what I mean. Pretty cool. Closing out as well, there is one final one. Obviously, core Tyria Masteries are a thing. And the Fractal line, once upon a time, had this. The essential singularities that is completely shrouded in mystery. Who knows what they would have done with this? Details are obscured by the mists. It wasn't implemented in the end. I actually think that the fractal masteries are the worst masteries the devs did. Oh, I don't know. A lot of the core lines really needed a lot of work, so it doesn't surprise me they ended up throwing this away. No idea what they had. Maybe you guys have got some theories. People who play a lot of fractals. So there you have it, guys. That is the story of the lost Heart of Thorns Masteries. We talked all the way through the in-game night here. It's interesting thinking back to Heart of Thorns and how things might have been. When it comes to like Path of Fire, masteries that never were, really it's a different discussion of mounts that never were. And we only have a handful of stories there, so you can't really drill in so much. I'd like to see the devs expand or tweak, reconfigure the mastery system in so many different ways. Closing out here, I do have a quick comment. I was going to make a video about the graveyard. You guys might have seen me hinting about it in a few places, to do with the end of beta events. So at the end of the first beta, there was this big map-wide meta called the Great Critter Hunt, where you fought really dangerous chickens and stuff amongst the Norn. The second beta had a branded event with the chart, and the third had a Hunger Royale, like Hunger Games style thing with the Asura. Unfortunately, there's just not any great footage out on the internet. It's a nightmare to get permission from people and so on. So I'm going to leave in the description links to that stuff. That will not be a part of the graveyard, but an interesting chapter of Guild Wars 2's history nonetheless. Maybe it doesn't even count, to be honest. Otherwise, still got a few more ideas I'd love you guys to see. I hope people are still enjoying the series. Let me know if you are. Please support the videos in all the ways that you usually would, and I will see you for the next one very soon. Take care, guys.